Hello, everyone. My name is Pavlos Papapavlou. I'm a tech journalist, and I work for Cosmote TV, Liquid Media, and Internet.gr. And I will be the moderator for your first session. Please do not forget to follow us, our hashtag for Frontrunners 2022, and to send your questions under the streaming of each speaker. And now we will move on to our first session. Let's welcome Mr. Dimitris Farmakis, head of Esports-Yieldy and Esports, who will speak on the subject, what is esports and how can a club create an esports team? Mr. Farmakis, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papapavlou. Thank you for the invitation. Apparently, one of my headsets are popping out of my ear, but we will power through. Yeah, as you personally know, I'm very excited always to talk about esports. So I would jumping at the opportunity to jump straight in. I have already prepared the presentation, which I'm very eager to share with everyone. So if I could get it going right here. So I know that we would be talking about how a sports club could create an esports team, but I think it's more. It's better to get a bird's eye view of the esports space first, so that we can get a sense of the magnitude of the market and the metrics, the ecosystem, and then move on to more specific areas like how sports and esports have interlocked. So I think that we can move forward. A little bit about me. I started off by organizing some tournaments back in 2013. With my favorite game at the time, Street Fighter 4. I have also, after that, I worked alongside a lot of various national level teams and tournament organizers. Then I made the jump to remote working, where I have been working as such for the last 7 years. Started off by community management for Hitbox.tv, which was the second streaming platform at the time behind Twitch.tv. Later acquired and renamed into Smashcast.tv. Ever since 2015, I have been speaking for esports in various Greek universities, and I've also spoken at municipalities for the effects of esports in the younger generations. The last 4 years, I have been working fully immersed into esports and blockchain. I started off as a market analyst for First Point Ventures, which is a boutique venture firm based in Singapore. And then I transitioned to being the head of esports at Yieldy and Esports. Those are two different projects, with Yieldy being the Algorand blockchain's largest decentralized finance protocol. In that project, we made some partnerships with esports teams in order to target localized esports fans and educate them in decentralized finance and the products that we had in the platform. And now, as head of esports at Esports.gg, we're creating the world's largest Web3 esports engagement platform, where we may aim to bring fans closer to the teams through NFTs, play-to-earn games, and the metaverse. Moving on, I thought that it would be a good idea to have a brief overview of what we will be discussing today. We'll start with what is esports for the uninitiated. Some basic market data. Then we will analyze, not very deeply, on a very high level, the esports ecosystem and the various stakeholders therein. We'll talk about the overlap that esports and sports have had, especially the past 2 years. We'll talk about also the needs of a pro team, and then we will see how sports clubs can integrate esports in their practices. What is esports? Being a person that's been in esports for 15 years, I kind of dislike the term. I much prefer competitive gaming, because it's exactly that. You're playing video games in a competitive manner, in a competitive setting with other teams or players, if we're talking about single player titles. And now there is a cash up for grabs. This thing keeping sliding off, but anyway, I'm sure that Pavlos remembers the days when we were competing for a mouse and a keyboard, but those times have long since passed. The differentiating factor for esports is that they can be held either physically, at a location with live audiences, but also virtually. Everyone can play and attend from their houses, and this has enabled the fans to get closer to the phenomenon, being able to follow their teams and their favorite players around, and view the viewing of the spectacle becomes easier. Some of the biggest esports titles are League of Legends, with it being the most established and the biggest esport, in my opinion, right now, made by Riot Games. Then Valve's Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which as a structure, it bears closely resemblance to F1, multiple events held at various physical locations around the world with the same teams, and all of them are part of a bigger league, the ESL Pro League. Then we move on to another Valve game, Dota 2. We move on to Rainbow Six Siege, which is an up-and-comer, actually. It's been around for a while, but it's gaining in popularity. We then have a new entry in the first-person shooter space, which is called Valorant. Then we have Overwatch and Call of Duty, which were the first games actually to implement a system where each team had their own home arena, where there is ticketing and fans could attend the games in physically. And it was like a sports spectacle in the sense that audiences could come over and watch the game, and then when the game was off, it was out. And then my personal favorites, which are the fighting games, to be honest, which are in a more grassroots level, but now are experiencing a bit of an esports. They are trying to break out into esports. So following that, some very basic esports market data. The global revenue is being growing year over year, even through COVID. 2021 global revenue exceeded 1 billion, which puts it at a plus of 14.5% from 2022. 75% of the above figure comes from sponsorships and media rights, up close to $800 million, with other revenue streams including publisher fees, which are the most established leagues in the world. It was first done by Riot Games for their esports ventures, and then followed by ESL and Blast Pro Series, is the fact that teams can now buy in and then receive revenue share from sponsorships of the league, media rights, merchandising, tickets, and so on and so forth. This also brought an increase in revenue from merchandise and tickets, but not enough. Teams are not merely leveraging that enough yet. Then we have digital activities, which can also include, what my platform does, NFTs, play to earn, metaverse, those kinds of things. And then we have live streaming, which means that a lot of teams have opted to implement or to engage a lot of influencers or community leaders under their banner in order to stream or play for their brand. All of the above are severely underdeveloped, which means that there is a very big opportunity for any team and brand to get into those spaces and try and make these figures bigger. In 2021, we had 465 million people watching esports, with an interesting divide of 229, I need to learn my numbers, million enthusiasts, and 2,035,000 occasional viewers. In this segment, occasional viewership is noted as watching esports at least once per month, and enthusiasts is following esports closely, more like 2 to 3 times per week. And I would be remiss to mention that we had actually in 2019 the LEC summer split that took place in Oaxaca, in Marusi, and G2 won. And I think that I am on the very back end of the picture there, but I can't be seen, but I can say that I was there. So let's talk about the good stuff now. Let's talk about the basic stakeholders and how they view and interact with the market. On a very basic level, actually, the relationships and the stakeholders, I could probably drone on and on and on about those. But, in 2019, I think the Esports Observer, which is one of the leading publishers in esports, put out a graph that I think it's the best high-level overview of the esports market and how it works. And for the most part, it revolves around one phrase. It's teams play games and events broadcasted on live streaming platforms viewed by fans who support the teams. This holds true for any game, any team. We have the teams that we have been in esports for years upon years. Teams like Team Liquid or Fnatic have very large followings that follow them and support them in the games they play. To be honest, when a team is expanding in a new game, it's kind of like a celebration of sorts for their fans and the new fans that they will acquire through their relationship with that game. And then due to the fact that they assimilate more and more games and they're expanding more and more games and getting new rosters, they are eligible for more and more events. Those events then can leverage those brands like the Team Liquids or Fanatics of the world that get into the games and the events for more and bigger cut of media rights in live streaming platforms, which are then viewed by the fans who, again, support the teams. It's interesting to note that this flywheel effect type of thing does not only, it does include other, again, stakeholders, but the ones outside of it, but with direct impact on it, are the game publishers and developers who view esports as a marketing tool. And I think that Riot Games, the developer of League of Legends, was one of the first to come out and say it straight up to everyone. And the other interesting thing is that they have been going with League of Legends esports for close to 11 years now, and they have only been profitable for the last 1 year. They were viewing it heavily as a marketing tool all of those years, but they are now happy to report that it has now become an actual product, a standalone thing that they aim to build on. On the other, apart from the game publishers and the devs, we have also the brands. The brands, as most of you know, because you're in the sports world for the most part, they view the esports space as new space for advertisement, and to get into a new space and try to engage those coveted 15 to 25 or now 35, now that we millennials have grew up a bit, crowd. To be completely honest, there have been brands that had gotten into the space earlier than some others. Examples include Red Bull and Monster. Energy drinks were very quick to get into esports, and now their names have become practically linked. And there isn't a team that starts now in esports and they don't think about hunting down for an energy drink sponsorship, to be honest. Other categories, the sky is the limit. We now have brands that produce eyewear. We now, hardware, chairs, setups like desks, screens, whatever. Anything that can be used in a player's real life or virtual life or esports career can also be leveraged and advertised through esports. And lastly, we have the investors. While there are people that say, esports is growing and it has grown exponentially and so on and so forth, we all understand that it's not nearly enough on the level of other established sports or leagues. You can't compare esports to football per se because of the magnitudes, and the people that follow them. This is why there are a lot of investors, most of which were endemic to the space to begin with, like people bouncing together and creating funds. But now we are seeing an abundance of money coming out from funds that have previously invested into sports, come into esports and invest in teams, venues, tournament organizers, anything basically, in an attempt to get into the market as possible and then to increase their return on the investment. So let's talk about why we're here, esports and sports. So we all most of us know that there is an NBA 2K league that has been active since 2018. That league consists of teams that are, their own brands, but are owned by actual NBA teams. They have become very serious in the way that they organize this. They are emulating the Overwatch Call of Duty paradigm of having training facilities for each esports team that are located within the facilities of the larger sports team. And also each training facility has an adjacent space where the matches can be viewed by fans and the audience. They can come into the space and view it with their physical presence. The Major League Soccer has its own esports arm, EMLS, which came out of their previous efforts of trying to navigate COVID with the cancellations of many of their football matches. I'm also making a mention of that down in the presentation. My most favorite motorsport in the world, F1, have also their own esports league that follows closely in the paradigm of the real of the actual races, but they are held in a studio in partnership with Gfinity, if I recall correctly. I am very happy to see that Mercedes has been doing also well there, but that's a matter of personal preference. I would be very remiss if I didn't say that we had the honor of holding the WRC Esports World Finals here in Greece as part of the Rally Acropolis festivities and the races. And there has been something that has been tearing the community a bit. I think that this is also a sports thing. There are various chess masters that are now joining the ranks of popular esports teams, and they are working with them to both promote chess, but also create content for them. Most of the times, to be honest, I kind of watch that because chess alongside martial arts are the only things that I regret not starting at an earlier age. So yeah, we are witnessing across function between chess and esports. The IOC has been, in their own words, looking at esports for the past few years. They have announced their own virtual series, which includes auto racing, baseball, cycling, rowing, and sailing. Just a tidbit of information, the IOC has recently said that they are only looking to engage with sports titles, with sports esports, not whatever word I put here might sound negative, but not the more popular titles anyway. And we are seeing a lot of prominent athletes moving into the space, either by founding and owning teams or investing into teams. Actually, this presentation was made a couple of weeks ago, so I wasn't able to add the fact that Usain Bolt recently, just announced his part ownership of an esports team. But we have people like Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson who co-own Axiomatic, who is an investment firm that owns a part of a very prominent team called Team Liquid. We have Gareth Bale with 11 Esports. We have Antoine Griezmann that owns Greasy Esports with his brother. We have Jonas Jerebko from Boston Celtics that owns Renegades. We are working closely with him and with Renegades as part of our partnership with esports. And we also have people like Romain Grosjean with his team, R8G Esports. I think that I should also mention that David Beckham was owner of Guild Esports, but then it was uncovered during their listing that he was a brand ambassador to that team. And so we see that there are various ways that sports people can enter and athletes can enter esports in various interesting ways. So now we should probably talk about how esports and sports worked during COVID. I think that esports, when it comes to entertainment, were one of the few things around the world that were quick to shift to an online model. I remember reading about lockdowns happening all around the world, and then I was seeing esports announcements about events that were to happen in a couple of weeks' time, saying that they will be shifting completely to an online format. This was a very bad time for the world, but thankfully the esports market as a whole weathered it, and they were able to keep the lights on and get the competition and have the competitions going. There are some examples of how esports and sports interacted during COVID, like the Finnish Hockey League. They used simulated matches, like they had teams competing each other, but with the AI settings. They didn't have any actual players to determine their playoffs. And actually, it went so well that they decided to then launch their own Finnish Hockey Esports League, which I think has been running for a couple of years now, if I recall correctly. Following suit, a lot of the NHL teams decided, mutually all decided, to not cancel their games completely due to lockdowns, but to actually simulate them in NHL 20 and broadcast them for their fans. An interesting tidbit there was that initially the fans were very apprehensive of the move, and they were actually they wanted they preferred the games to not happen. But then when the first games were starting to show, they realized that there is also interest in that sort of thing, and then it became one of the examples that us esports people were using when we were talking to other people about esports and how they could help COVID during the COVID pandemic. Then, as previously mentioned in the previous slide, MLS used esports to keep their audience engaged during lockdowns. They actually had a very hybridish model. They had actual players playing between them with the teams, but that was part of a smaller esports league type of initiative. And they also simulated their games through FIFA 2020 and 2021. Wow. And that resulted actually to them thinking that an actual EMLS league might be very viable, which apparently it was, and has been helping to spread the word of soccer throughout the US and Latin America. And then motorsports like Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, W Series, and the Le Mans series, they established racing simulation series during lockdowns. To be honest, I was only following Formula One at the time, so it was very interesting for me to see, to be able to see all of the drivers that you usually see out in the racetrack competing virtually. And not only that, I was very happy to see that most of the drivers were a lot into the various antics that they could pull off with other drivers. It was pretty entertaining to watch, and I think that it also showed the stakeholders of F1 that there is merit in allowing the drivers to expose more of their personality and more of what makes them a person, rather than staying strictly to their racecraft and their ability. Moving forward, let's break down the needs of a pro esports team before moving forward with how sports and esports could interact together. On a very high level, actually on a tier 1 and borderline tier 2 level, most teams do not differ in their structure from sports teams. There are some things that make them stand out from a standard sports team, I would assume. So let's break down all of the necessary aspects to make a pro esports team competitive. The first thing would be a coach and analyst team. This is because we have to do. Let's take on as an example the League of Legends game. That game has like over 100 characters by now. They are used in various leagues, in various combinations, because it's teams of 5 against 5, and you need a coach and an analyst team to have a constant view of every region, of every tournament, of every weekend that's going on, very competitive weekend that's going on, in order to get any sort of information about character usage or any plays that the team can do with their words or their map. I won't delve into the lingo there, but you need to be able to have all the access on that information so that the coach can then construct the strategies and the plays that each team will use in their own tournaments and their own leagues. And to be completely honest, when esports first started, like 5 people and the coach were more than enough. But now that esports have become this global spanning phenomenon, I think that most teams right now, even the lowest level teams, like I think that the Greek level teams have a coach and 2 analysts, and the top tier teams probably have like 5 or more in order to keep up with everything that's been going around and everything that's been happening, any shift in the meta. For your benefit, meta means the current state of playing, because there are a lot of things to consider. There are characters, there are items, there are positionings on the map. Every game is not the same with the last. So you need people, you need eyes to keep track of those. Also, as you can see in the picture, Device from Astralis at the time, now he's not in Astralis, was one of the first players that started talking about mental health in esports. Astralis was also one of the first teams that ever brought the subject of fitness and mental health combined into esports. We have seen when I first started watching esports back in 2009 and beyond, we were getting horror stories about, especially in South Korea, about teams that put their players in a house and they would be playing for 12 to 13 hours every day, and they would even worse horror stories were about players winning their right to go to the movies or having girlfriends in some cases. Those days are long gone, especially because there is a fear of constant fear of burnout that's pervasive in the esports industry. So now teams of fitness and mental health experts, esports psychologists, and esports health practitioners are needed for a team to function well. And another side note I should make is that I think that a couple of days ago, either Washington Post or Forbes, I can't remember the outlet, published an article that breaks down player injury in esports and how it's still not being addressed as it should. We are, from carpal tunnel syndromes to, dysfunctioning backs, everything can happen in there. So those experts are needed in order to make a team perform better. Training facilities is an interesting thing because there are 2 types of ways for a team to approach. One of them would be more like a training house or a gaming house, as we used to call it. This means that your players are all living together. That idea started off from South Korea again, and in some ways does help the team spirit and to build camaraderie in the team members. But we have seen the paradigm of sports where the athletes are gathering all for the practice and then go about their business and go to their home. So there are a couple of teams, especially I think that Team Liquid and Evil Geniuses, that are exploring something like that right now. Some more of a loose interpretation of training facilities that are to be visited only when practicing. They also need chefs for those that all live together, to be honest, or a personnel that can assist them with the day-to-day functions around the house. This is again something that's needed in training house situations where all the players are living together, so they don't have to take their minds off of the game and their performance and make dinner or whatever. A team by itself does nothing, unfortunately. So one of the things that they need also is a social media or PR and/or content creation personnel and team. The way that esports teams work they leverage their social media numbers and their social media presence and branding in order to gain more revenue from sponsorships right now. And the players, especially since they devote so much time playing and training, they don't have the time to keep up with their own social media, apart from Twitter maybe. We have seen a lot of rage tweets coming out after tournaments, but they do rely on PR companies and content creation companies to establish some branding, and the teams are working with those companies to expand their branding and their appeal to the fan base. And last but not least, people are needed to manage this whole thing, from scheduling to social media and PR, etc. And once all of that is in place, you need people to actually sell your brand outward, gain those sponsorships, gain more revenue in order for the team to be able to work as as advertised. And I think that we are going to be breaking this down a bit, but there are a few ways that esports and sports can work together. The first one would be to create their own esports team. There have been quite a few examples of that. Schalke 04 did the same. I think that Dortmund at some point had a team. Those are not examples that have evolved well over time because of the expectations. There is a huge rift between those who are into esports and know what esports are about, and the sports personnel of teams. So in order to gain their attention, sometimes the esports people have been selling, not very adequate information, and that's sadly that has also been happening, at least in a couple of examples, at least in Greece. A team can, of course, create their own esports team while taking in mind all of the things that we analyzed in the previous slide. The level of success that they could meet depends on the level of the resources allocated. A team, one of the things that we Greeks have done in regards to creating an esports team has been finding some players and then some person that could be the liaison, and then tell them that they could play under the sports team brand, but not heavily or actually invest into that. So just the only thing that's being done is that they are just taking part in the competitions, and that's not really viable, because at some point players will need to get paid, and when that time comes and there are no resources allocated, that whole thing will crumble. So I guess that the takeaway here would be that the success will be measured in regards to the resources allocated and investment into such an undertaking. One of the most popular ways for teams that to work with esports teams has been what I call the PSG example. As you see in the pictures, PSG has partnered. I'm not going to pronounce that because I'm not very good at French. I'm actually not good at all. But PSG has been partnering with quite a few teams actually. Like they have partnered with Talon Esports, and they are working with their League of Legends team in order to gain exposure to League of Legends. They are working with top Dota 2 team called LGD for Dota 2, and unfortunately those were shared after I created the presentation. They are aiming to work with a top Japanese team for Rainbow Six and a top Fortnite team that's based in the US called Team New Age to gain exposure into Fortnite. Typically, PSG, the thing that they acquire from such a partnership is that they can easily tap into the fan bases of each team and of each game, and they can make their name associated with those fan bases and games. This is something that other teams are also exploring right now. But the thing is that there are so many things happening at once that I don't foresee that a lot of sports teams will be able to emulate it with success, at least the bigger ones. But the interesting thing about such a partnership is the fact that it can work no matter what the scale, either in a global scale or in a very regional level. Then there are some ways to include esports in sports by not creating teams at all, and I think that they are worth mentioning. One of them would be including esports in activations and initiatives with existing assets. That means, let's say, we during our time with esports, we came across an example of a cricket league having their top athletes play cricket and then broadcast that, and it was pretty fun if you're into cricket. But I think that this is a very good example of including, of not going the long way or going all in and investing in esports heavily, but rather using it as a tool for your own initiatives and activations and trying to tap into the fan base like that. The other would be to create esports related content with simulations. There are tons of ways that these could be as funny, as serious, as memey as everyone and anyone wants. And the last one would be to engage with Web3 technologies and solutions related to esports. This is kind of like our own platform where we are gathering a lot of esports teams, and we are also looking and we're in talks to work with some prominent regional sports teams as well. That those teams have understood that engaging platforms like us can also help get their name into those spaces in esports, and maybe they can level up their engagement as well through NFTs and the metaverse. I see that we have some time left, and it seems like I was very fast in how I went about things. So I'll be happy to answer any and all questions. Just fire away, Pavlos, if
Okay.
there are any. I should probably stop sharing now.
You're great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's move on our audience questions. We have some guys sent some questions. So we have a question from Mr. Nikos Zalakis. He's asking, what's the biggest opportunity for the growth of esports in the Greek market?
Well, it depends of what your position is in the Greek market. Are we talking about the Greek sports market or the Greek esports market? Because
the Greek esports market.
Yeah, so it depends on the games that someone wants to get into, and these types of esports teams. There are the biggest problem with esports is that they are actually owned by companies that seek to make money out of them. So whoever wants to get into the, let's say, organization of esports events has to present a decent use case and a decent plan that outlines how, at the end of the day, the company will either gain revenue or they will gain engagement, or even revenue through their own games. So let's say, for example, League of Legends, you need to have the official rights to carry out any events. But in other games like Dota 2 and Counter-Strike, you don't really have to have anything at all. You can just do your own tournaments, and there is no problem. I think that the same thing also applies to games like Rocket League, which is a non-violent game. It's just cars pushing a ball around, and it's pretty good. And it's a pretty good game. And and I think that the same also applies in FIFA. So from the point of view of a tournament organizer, it's just having a plan that could maximize viewership, engagement, and then revenue for the tournament organizer and also the publisher, if the publisher needs. If we're talking about sports or esports teams, then I'm afraid that the market is currently not, how should I say this? It's still underdeveloped in some respects, but I think that there is the opportunity to grab the attention of people and of esports fans that have not considered alternative titles or alternative ways of competing, like on a more grassroots setting, on a more amateurish level. We also, as there are also a lot of countries out there that are exploring a grassroots approach in regards to creating the pros of the future. those are all things that can be discussed, and those are all things that can help. And I do believe that there are points of opportunity for the market.
Okay, the second question is, how has the creation of esports teams from massive brands like Paris Saint-Germain or Premier League clubs assisted in the development of the industry?
So they haven't created any teams. PSG has partnered with 4 teams. Another good example would be Manchester City partnering with FaZe Clan. The thing is that by those partnerships, the esports market benefits more than the totality of the sports market. And this is because, the more people hear about esports, the more are starting to think, oh, what is esports? How can I get there? How can I work with those people? And then this is one of the factors that brings worldwide growth. Also, and hopefully on a regional level as well, because we are seeing what happens outside of Greece, and I would love to see some equivalent things happening here. Most of the biggest reason is that we need in Greek esports. I feel like they need the structure that sports can bring into them. And I think that for the most part, it's all about getting the name out there and getting people acquainted with the phenomenon.
Okay, the third question is from Anastasios Traianos. He's asking, what's the relation between physical activity and both passive and active esports consumption?
So the olden days, people were more like me, not as prone to physical activity. But now there are studies that are happening, and actually I had looked over it quite a bit in the past for another venture that we had in mind. There are some studies that say that gamers now are fittest than they have ever been. They are more aware of how physical. It's kind of ironic for me to answer to this question, but gamers now are even more motivated to be healthy in both mind and spirit. So yeah, there is a connection, and there are quite a few studies that note that.
Okay, we have 2 questions. I don't think we have enough time for both of those. So
I'll try to be fast.
Mrs. Katia Manda is asking, yesterday the Hellenic Football Federation announced the collaboration with the VGL Esports. Will it help the industry?
It depends. I am familiar with the way that VGL Esports has been working, and it can help in some ways. However, the way that VGL Esports is framed, and I don't want to publicly make any accusations. I'm not accusing. I'm just analyzing the business model. It does require quite a bit of an investment on the side of teams, and it remains to be seen whether they will decide to invest or not. As I said previously, it's all about the resources that you are allocating.
Okay, one more question from Mr. Georgios Marios Solanis. What's your opinion about esports in our country? I think Panathinaikos is doing a good job in this particular project.
I mean, there have been, especially from Panathinaikos, there have been attempts in the past. We esports people know how they ended. I am very keen on seeing how this new venture, this new undertaking will roll out. I also think that it's a bit early to say if they're doing a good job or not. I'm a very big skeptic, and I would like to revisit that later down the line.
Okay, and the final question, we have about 1 minute. So from Anastasios Traianos again, the esports market is widely unregulated on a governmental level. There are currently many thousands of players banned from e-doping across the esport universe. However, in some games, it's relatively simple to just open a new account and carry on playing. Also, the rapid development of the new alternative leagues offer players the opportunity to migrate from one league to another without much scrutiny because there's no central governing body. Similarly, match fixing in esports is another phenomenon. What would the future steps be to improve the governance and regulation of esports? We have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I have 30 seconds, so I'll be fast. So on the first level, well, doping and hacks and all of these things are policed by the developers themselves by introducing anti-cheats. On the secondary level, now that the leagues are being more and more serious, publishers themselves are constructing bodies in order to police this whole undertaking because they have access to all of the data. Secondly, then on a governmental level, the government needs to be educated first in how esports work, and I missed the last part, unfortunately.
Hopefully we have another opportunity to answer all this. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to be here.